the third picture in a franchise, there are several things that you can do to make it more fun, make it bigger, make it better.
Big, crazy, I mean, it's everything.
It's a big, big logistical nightmare.
This is like #1 and #2 combined, with the effects, with the stunts, with the multiple states, the multiple locations, the traveling circus. I don't think I'd have it any other way.
It's like nothing you've ever seen, you know? It's really crazy.
They must be thinking, is that big enough? Maybe that's not big enough. We've got to go bigger. We got to think bigger.
I've never been challenged like this in my life, and I can't honestly say that I think I ever would have been had I continued going the way I was.
Everything's much better in this movie. It feels magical. I think we've learned from the first two. This time we worked our butts off to make this the best. It's great.
Transformers!
I think the reaction to the second movie played a large part in the development of the third movie. Michael was very aware, as was the studio and Lorenzo. Everyone was aware that the reaction to #2 was not as favorable as it had been to #1.
The second movie was just sort of like a lot of second movies. It's an introduction of new characters. You know, how do we keep this exciting? How do we keep the discovery? New people, new faces. But we overdid that. I think there was too many new characters to pay off, and we didn't have the time.
Oh, I'm thrilled. Oh, I'm sorry, Transformers 2.
Was I proud of the movie? Yeah, there are things that are great in the movie, the things that are fun. It wasn't my best movie. I knew we could have done better. We were slogging through the ending. It got sloppy, and that's just because it's too little writing time. The movie was written during a writer's strike. Strike happened, we're still prepping the movie, and I said, we're already into this. It's not the best way, this is totally not the way to do a movie. I would never recommend it again, but we're gonna get this movie going, hell or high water.
Some of the flaws in it can be traced to the guild strike and not having enough time to really develop a story that might get to a deeper character level. But I think that movie came out of criticism of the first that, wow, these robots are so amazing, and what you can do with the effects are so amazing. We wanted to see so much more of that. And so I think the design of Revenge of the Fallen became about spectacle first, as opposed to starting with a stronger narrative through line and finding the action scenes that would fit that.
You know, it was a yeoman's effort, I guess, for being under the circumstances.
Michael wasn't sure that he wanted to make a third movie. He wasn't sure, certainly, that he wanted to jump into it right away.
Michael first thought he'd take a break between Transformers 2 and Transformers 3. Go off, do a little movie or something. But he realized that you might lose some of your key crew. And Michael Bay is a very loyal person, above and beyond everything, which is pretty cool. And once he has a team assembled, he's got people he's worked with for years. He loves working with the same people. I certainly enjoy working with him, and he realized we probably should roll into the next movie and keep all the same team so we know what we're doing and build upon what we already know.
What we did first was design robots. Dozens of robots, literally. Some got facelifts, some got new weapons, some got new armaments. That was the priority. So the marching orders were get these robots together and get going.
One of the nice things about the evolution of this franchise is that with each successive movie, we've had more liberty to create characters for the robots.
On the second one, what we ended up doing was, you know, venturing into more personality-driven robots and also into more unique anatomy. And on the third one, I'd say it probably just kind of continued along the same lines in that we've now transitioned fully into kind of a creature realm of organic motion and organic design, but still within our Transformers kind of mechanical language of materials and shapes and all that sort of stuff. And then I would say that on the third, we went even more into specific kind of characterization, personality explorations. You know, we'd done some of that on the second, but on the third, it was even more so.
I think we wanted to introduce some exciting new Autobot and Decepticon characters, but only a few so that we really got to know them as characters, and they each got their moments to really register and make an impression. In previous movies, Bumblebee was Sam's guardian first and foremost. And in this movie, we felt like Bumblebee should graduate from that role. So we wanted Bumblebee to be one of the fighting ranks. He's gone from kind of up-and-coming member of the Autobots to a real leader of the Autobots.
He had sort of cosmetic changes to the car that would then influence and show up in the robot in subtle ways. But, you know, as fundamentally his face and all the things that really make him identifiable haven't changed.
The car was the same for the first two movies. And we just needed to freshen it, update it a little bit, use the newer model, incorporate a lot of GM's new ideas to get just a fresher, sharper car. In this movie, Optimus now has a trailer.
It's a 53-foot Great Dane refrigerated trailer. It's just the most beautiful semi-trailer, if there was a beautiful semi-trailer, which turns into some type of flying apparatus.
We had a power-up idea on the second one, you know, that when the SR-71 character dies, he sort of, or sacrifices himself, he takes on a lot of that guy's actual body matter, which if you think of it in literal human terms is kind of disgusting. But he takes his power and his paneling and all this kind of stuff and turns himself into a flying, powered-up Optimus. Maybe that idea was lingering in Michael's mind and other people's minds for the third one was let's do it again, a power-up Optimus, but let's, number one, explain, you know, whatever happened with the trailer from the, you know, from the original series, let's do something with that. And number two, you know, the idea of Uber Optimus is just cool.
The concept Corvette that we have is so cool looking. It's definitely a Corvette, and yet it feels completely different.
It's essentially the same car as the second film, but the second film it was a hardtop. We sent it back to GM and cut the top of it and made it the roadster that it is today. He is Enzo, as in Enzo Ferrari.
Early on, Enzo was sort of modeled on a character from the mythology called Mirage. And in an early draft of the script, he had some powers of invisibility, ability to cloak other objects. And as we pulled those out, we left the Mirage sort of name behind. But in that case, it was really important to Michael that this character have the personality of a Ferrari. So we really wanted that car in the movie. So we gave him an Italian accent and an Italian name. Hugh was initially modeled on a character from the mythology named Wheeljack, who was an inventor and a technical specialist.
Initially, you know, it was sort of, okay, it's Q from James Bond, sort of, so, and he's going to be an old Rolls Royce. It's like, okay, that's cool. So I've got like a little retro vibe to play with. Maybe if he's a, you know, I remember Q being kind of tall and scrawny in the old movies, and so, you know, maybe he's a slightly bumbling kind of, you know, character. And the first take I did on it, Michael, you know, rightly so, said, that's a Pixar design. That's not our movie. Like that, it's too cartoony and it's too kind of cute, and I don't like it. Then sort of a mandate came down, honestly, I think it was from Spielberg, why don't you make him look like Albert Einstein? Literally.
The Wreckers are 3 new vehicles. The interesting thing is they're partially transformed and they're equipped with Gatling guns.
I just think they're the coolest invention ever. I mean, race cars with guns? What more could a boy ask for? I don't even know how to call them. They're not cars, though. They're war machines. They're speed war machines, you know. Combining sheer firepower and speed, how cool is that?
In the mythology, they had very mercenary personality to them and couldn't always be trusted, but ultimately would show up and get the job done. So for the movie rendition of them, we saw them as a pit crew, and thus the NASCAR disguises and the brash kind of rough and tumble attitudes.
That was a neat attempt to do a real mashup of alien aesthetics with you know, hardcore nuts and bolts, NASCAR, you know, space frames and all the cool stuff that's underneath those cars. I felt like that was an example of where we, you know, rather than a new Transformer thing that was kind of, you know, harsh and kind of spiny and threatening and all that sort of thing, it was actually a fun, you know, kind of colorful take on robots. Megatron has fallen on horribly hard times in our movie, and it's almost sad to see the bad guy, you know, laid so low as that. As much as he's a terrible guy, you almost hate to see him like that.
We just wanted to make him kind of pathetic, ugly. That's why we had the sheet, the cloak with his ripped off face, trying to plan his sinister little plan.
He's taken on a very earthy, organic kind of tone in terms of the truck vehicle and his venue when we see him in Africa and all that. So that was a new thing to explore.
Shockwave was a big deal in the Transformers mythology. He was a character who had remained on Cybertron for the Decepticons and was leading the battalions there. He really represents kind of brute force and military tactics. And what we wanted for the movie, and we chose Shockwave to represent it, was a character that as soon as he appeared on screen, you knew he was a fearsome foil for Optimus. You knew he was a fearsome foil for Optimus. When Michael and I first started discussing how to present Shockwave, I pitched in the notion of a steed or a mount, kind of a horse for Shockwave, as if he could enter with this chariot. And for story purposes, we needed something that would tunnel underground to reach this engine part in the Chernobyl sequence. So I pitched this driller idea as a snake or a worm, and it was fairly straightforward.
It took us a while to figure out what the driller was exactly in relationship to Shockwave. I mean, it was clearly a vehicle, but at the same time, it's its own entity on some level, and the way that he drives it, you know, is he sitting in a cockpit, or is he more like Spartacus on a chariot? You know, there were different kinds of postures and relationships to him. I mean, at one point, it was almost as if is the driller a bunch of almost independent worm entities that he has lashed together with a kind of a saddle or a harness, if you will, and he's kind of riding them. You know, is he riding worms on some level? So that, you know, ultimately it ended up being more like a cockpit, I would say, but there were still some visual elements that suggested kind of a riding-like sort of way of using your hands.
What I pitched is basically a straightforward drilling snake, but of course in true Michael Bay fashion. Once it went through his imagination and the artist at ILM, became this multi-tendrilled hydra of a huge thing the size of 3 city blocks. And the first time he showed me the visuals for that, I said, oh yeah, that'll work. The Dreads were characters that Michael brought to the table early on, as he has done in these movies. There are some characters that he wakes up with a vision of in the middle of the night and comes to a meeting and says, I see these guys. I don't know how they fit into the story, but they're going to be animalistic, and it's going to be awesome if we use them in this car chase we're talking about. I just want these guys to be scary.
Decepticons, usually they're flying, they're some kind of spaceships or jet fighters, but now they brought them into vehicle mode.
And they don't exist in the Transformers mythology. That's a Michael Bay special.
We have a new arch villain in the movie under the name of Sentinel Prime.
Sentinel is kind of the key character for this movie. In my initial drafting of the story, I talked about this notion of finding in the mythology a father figure for Optimus, someone that he had apprenticed under. And there's not a lot about Sentinel Prime in the mythology, so I felt that it gave us a lot of license to take a character who existed in Transformers lore, but do something new with him and do something surprising with him, and find an Autobot whose betrayal could really emotionally impact Optimus.
I always wanted somewhere in the Transformers universe to do what I would consider a proper kind of Gundam, L-game, Japanese knight warrior kind of robot, because it's such a huge, great library of influences out there to choose from. I said, I know this is not going to fly. I'm just going to do it because I want to see how much of a, a slightly more traditional, cleaner design I can sneak in. And to my surprise, it actually went through. Ultimately, it had to be articulated into a more Transformery language, but the basic shapes and gestures ended up largely kind of as clean as I had originally sketched them. It got articulated with extra sort of negative spaces and lots of mechanical parts and all that, but fundamentally there's some large contiguous flat surfaces on him that you ordinarily would never have made the cut, and I was happily surprised to see that it did. Some of the experiments we did where the face mask was extremely clean looking and sort of techie looking, I actually really like those, but I think, when you think of him as an older character, and obviously he has a huge story component and there's history behind him and all that, the decision to go with a more wizened and ultimately obviously a little bit piratey look was probably the appropriate way to go.
He needed to be something as big, if not bigger, than Optimus. And there was something about the fire truck that suggested ability, coming to the rescue, being on the side of right, that could subvert, our true designs with him. And Michael found a really cool looking fire truck.